Well, it's Matt Kirkner on the Tech Ed Podcast. Welcome to this week's episode. We talk all the time on this podcast about the available funding for higher education, federal funding, state funding, there's private funding, nonprofit funding, and so on. It's one thing for Congress or for a state legislature or a governor to allocate funding to an endeavor. It's another thing for an institution to actually utilize that funding in a way that benefits the community, benefits industrial employers, benefits students, and really creates a level of economic development that never would have existed if not for that funding. And for that matter, if not for the partnerships that are developed in putting that funding to work, partnerships with other institutions of higher education, partnerships with industrial employers, partnerships with our students and our faculty. Today's episode is all about those two things. Today, my guest on the Tech Ed Podcast leads an institution in Western Michigan known as Grand Rapids Community College. I've visited that college. I've been on the campus. I've seen firsthand the magic that happens there. And it is my great pleasure to welcome to the Tech Ed Podcast the president of Grand Rapids Community College, Dr. Charles Lepper, who has asked me to call him Chuck. And Chuck, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Ed Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So you've got such an interesting background. Education is obviously so central to what you do, a huge passion for education, from literally being told that you would never go to college to being a first generation college graduate. I would love to hear in your words, the value of education and why it's so important for us to have people believe in us and our futures.
Right. Well, thank you, Matt. As you mentioned, I grew up in rural Indiana, about 25 miles outside of Indianapolis, and my assistant high school principal told me I would never go to college and really discouraged me from taking college prep courses. And so I had folks who believed in me and who encouraged me, my parents, family members, friends, my high school guidance counselor, Judy Renbarger. I remember her name because she believed in me and was always pushing me to go to college. But when I went to college, I really anticipated that I would drop out or fail out. And I started in developmental math, and I remember being very embarrassed by that because I knew, or I thought I knew, what that meant. And so I felt less than and didn't really feel like that I belonged there. And it was because of people who really supported me, who believed in me, who helped guide me, who really were mentors to me to help me see that it was possible and that I could do it. And then many of the same folks encouraged me to pursue my master's degree. And then ultimately, one of my supervisors, Dr. Pat Dolly at Ivy Tech, said to me one day, you should go for your doctorate and you can be a college president. And so it was really her belief and others that mattered to me that allowed me to see those, leadership skills and to develop them to be where I am today.
It's interesting, Chuck. Just about a couple of weeks ago, we had a guest on the podcast. It's the president of Bismarck State College in Bismarck, North Dakota, talked about, you really used the same words that you just did, which was this idea of belonging in higher education. And he said exactly the same thing. He said, I didn't feel like I belonged there. I stepped into the institution and felt out of place, didn't feel like I belonged. And it sounds like you had a similar experience.
I did initially, but it was because of the people at Ball State University. I will really say the folks in the housing and residence life area who helped guide me, as well as my faculty members in my program there, that made me feel like I belonged and that I mattered. And I do think that is so important, particularly for the work that we do in community colleges. And we really emphasize that here at GRCC.
So very important, regardless of what somebody's background is, to make them feel welcome when they cross that chasm into higher education, whether that's a university, a community college, and so on. Really, really important. But I want to stay on this topic of community colleges in general. You've spent time in the university space. You've obviously spent lots of time in community colleges. What would you say is one of those number one or two things that people really underestimate about the value of a community college education?
Well, I think there's really two different answers to that. One is I don't think people fully understand what community colleges are. And I know for myself, being an educator, really even after completing my master's degree, I thought I understood community colleges, but it wasn't until I worked at one that I really understood it. And really, particularly the workforce development side of it. And so I worked on the Anderson campus of Ivy Tech as my first job in a community college. And within the first day, I saw people who I went to high school with who were there in the nursing program or family members or parents of friends from high school who had been dislocated from their job and were there for retraining and really trying to retrain and re-enter the workforce. And so it was during that experience that I really began to understand what community colleges do. And I think I was further removed from that because Indiana was the last state in the nation to develop a comprehensive community college system that I ultimately ended up working at for about 10 years. And so I think part of what folks underestimate is the impact that it has in the community. One of the things that pops into my head that have been surprising for folks in the community here in Grand Rapids I've talked about, we just completed an economic impact survey through Lightcast. And in 2020, 2021, so right in the heart of the pandemic, it's estimated that our economic impact in Kent and Ottawa County was $1 billion. And so, and I said that correctly with a B, $1 billion. And so that's a huge impact in that about 14,000 jobs are supported through the college's activities, through our alumni, through our workforce training. And so that is a huge impact where I think many people don't understand the connection between community colleges and their community.
I have to agree with you. And I tell people a lot of times when we're trying to put that into perspective, I mean, just go through your day, the car you drive, the people that maintain that car, the people that manufacture that car, you go to the doctor, you go to the dentist. I mean, it really throughout your entire day, wherever you go to dinner, there's a good chance that the person that's preparing that meal for you or helping to run the restaurant has learned their craft at the local community college. Every single aspect of what we do is touched by community colleges. And I love the way you answer that question because they have such a huge, huge impact on everything about us. And I think to your point also, a lot of times we think of college as what you do after high school, but one of the things that I've learned in all my times, lots and lots of conversations with different leaders and other individuals within our community and technical college systems is the average age of a community college student is can be quite a bit deeper into their career. These aren't necessarily people that are coming right out of high school, although that's a great option for students that are coming right out of high school. Tell us a little bit about the average age of your students and so on.
The average age of our student is 25. It used to be a little bit higher than that pre-pandemic. But as folks have re-entered into the workforce and quite honestly, as some of the jobs in our area are paying a little bit more, some folks are choosing to work instead of going to college. The state of Michigan, I think, is doing an incredible job of recruiting adult learners back into community colleges through the Michigan Reconnect program. We graduate 11% of the graduates in that program. And while 11% may not sound impressive, we have 28 community colleges in Michigan. Right. So we're doing more than our fair share, connecting with adults and getting them back into community colleges, getting them retrained, credentialed, and getting them back into the workforce that so desperately need people who have those credentials.
And so many aspects of that I want to explore here. We've got so much to cover here on the podcast. And I want to ask you a quick question just about the new role before we go into some of that. This is the second time that we've had the president of Grand Rapids Community College on our podcast, but it's in the form of a second person. You replaced Dr. Bill Pink, who joined us, I think it was a couple of years ago before moving to Ferris State University. And knowing that, any new leader is going to want to put their mark on the institution as well, but also carry forward those things that are working really, really well. You inherited this organization that had a lot of great things going for it. What would you say about that? And then second to that, how do you leave your mark in the ensuing 5, 10, 20 years, or as long as you're going to be in this role on the institution at Grand Rapids Community College?
I like to take pride in the fact in saying we were founded in 1914. And so we are the first community college in the state of Michigan, and some folks believe the fourth oldest community college in the nation. We have a long, long history and do many great things. And so we are very much centered in this community. There were many things to build upon, but I think my mark on the institution will be just continuing to work on our retention and completion and how we meet the needs of our workforce as it changes. We are starting to get into the AI space and trying to be a leading institution with that. We have a grant from Intel and have an AI incubator on our campus. I think we were one of 15 schools to receive that grant, and we're developing a certificate program in AI. And so I think making sure that our programs are relevant to the workforce that we're serving and the community that we're serving, how we close equity gaps in terms of completion and retention, and how we recruit and retain outstanding faculty that are diverse and reflect the community that we serve.
I can't let that answer go without asking you a little bit more about the certificate program in artificial intelligence. Tell us about that. Who's advising you on that particular program, and what type of student are you looking to attract to that?
Our dean of STEM is working through that and also have faculty members. But one of the things that we have done is create an AI task force. And so we really have kind of segmented things out into a variety of buckets to start to make some recommendations institution wide, because it's beyond just that certificate. And so that is something that we are awarding and have faculty who have some expertise in that area. But then how does that change the rest of the learning environment? So it's not going to be discreetly housed over in just the certificate program, but how do our faculty teach using AI? How do our students learn using AI? But also, how do we use AI from an operational standpoint as an institution to be more efficient and more effective? And so that task force has started meeting and are going to make some recommendations to me later this summer about what we need to do or what we should be doing as a college, so that we're out there ahead of other institutions as it comes to AI, and so that we can be well prepared to respond to that.
It certainly does, and you had one other word, Chuck, that also kind of caught my attention, and that's the whole idea of an incubator, and actually having companies that are looking at innovating in the AI space, having an opportunity to work within your institution and have the kind of support that a small business entrepreneur might benefit from in terms of developing their company. Is that what you're thinking there?
Yes, so we're being very intentional with that incubator space to make sure that not only our faculty and students are getting into that space, but also inviting the community to do that. This is what it's here for. It's the sandbox to come and play in and learn. It's very much a resource for our community, for our business clients, and for our students and our faculty and staff.
Which really aligns well with one of your two pillars in particular for your presidency, and that is building those partnerships with businesses and industry. So, what better way to do it than in an emerging technology like artificial intelligence, where they've got the resources available to them to figure out how it's going to transform their lives? And I can tell you, in speaking with a lot of small to mid-sized businesses, they know it's coming, but they haven't necessarily sorted out exactly how it's going to affect their organization and what they should do about it. So credit to you and to the entire college for taking a leadership role in this emerging technology. It's going to be fun to watch that roll out. So that's one of your particular pillars, is strengthening business and industry partnerships. The other one, and I'm going to read it directly, is empowering students with the skills and knowledge essential for success in an ever-changing world. So to do that second pillar, a lot of people would argue you need the first. In other words, if we're going to prepare students for success in this ever-changing world, we must have business and industry partnerships. So do you agree? And why is it so important for us to do both of these?
Well, absolutely. I think that in order for us to make sure that we're current in what we're preparing our students to enter into, we have to have relationship and dialogue with those businesses and those partners to say, what is it that you need? And what has changed, and how do we adapt, and how do we prepare students for that? And so, one of the things that we do is that we have advisory committees. I think we have about 17 of them that provide us feedback on curriculum and also help to build learning experiences for our students. And we do that also in partnership with West Michigan Works, which is our one-stop center. But it's also a great opportunity for us to find ways to be flexible and to be innovative. One of the programs where I think we have really demonstrated that was in our medical or apprenticeship program. And so we partner with the three major healthcare providers in the Grand Rapids area. It's an earn and learn model. And so 3 days a week, students in areas like medical assisting spend 3 days with their employer and work and get paid for that. And they also get full-time benefits, which is a great fringe benefit for the students. And if there's any gap in terms of tuition, the employer agrees to pay that. But then they spend 2 days learning. And so over the course of a year, they work and learn and treat their employment as a laboratory. And they also learn and earn the certificate. And my understanding is that we are the first apprenticeship program of that type that was endorsed by the Department of Labor. And so we have expanded that. And so we do it in places like neurodiagnostics and sterile processing and surgical technology. And we'll be launching cardiovascular tech and anesthesia tech. And those are areas that are so desperately needed by our hospitals. And that's also an opportunity for us to partner with not only bringing new people to the field from external, but also working with the hospitals to upskill some of their current employees. So with one of our partnerships, we are doing that for about 150 employees who work in their environmental services and their hospitality dining areas that are valued employees and who have a desire to move up in the organization. And so this is one way to help them earn a credential to start that career path.
I can't say enough about the value of this kind of education where students, yes, they're having the academic rigor, they're going through their studies, but they're also getting the opportunity, side by side, not waiting until they're finished with their academic pathway, but concurrent to be able to put those skills to work. And really, everybody's the beneficiary, right? Certainly the healthcare provider, because they're getting that assistance. They're also filling a gap. None of our hospitals and other medical facilities can find enough people right now. And so they're solving for that challenge. And here's this student that is, depending upon background, economic situation, and so on, is really having an academic pathway that is supported economically or financially by that employer. I mean, it's the best of every world, it sounds like.
Well, it is. And, Matt, I would add to that, it also gives us an opportunity to connect with smaller communities because many smaller communities still have these needs but don't have the critical mass for a program to be housed there. And so we can provide that apprenticeship program in smaller communities and then do the classroom portion online. And so we're finding creative ways to be innovative and serve smaller communities as well who have those needs.
I've spent my share of time around Grand Rapids as well, and it really is, in terms of the size of communities, an incredibly diverse area. You have larger cities, you've got rural areas with smaller communities. So I've really enjoyed spending time in your part of the world. I think most recently I was at the LG plant in Holland, which was a fascinating tour. That was a few months ago. But really a diverse community in so many ways, including the diverse industries that you've got there. We had Steve Downing, who's the CEO of Gentex. For those that don't know that company, if you're driving in your car and you've got that little light that comes on the side mirror, very good chance that was developed and manufactured by Gentex. I know that, from our experiences, you've got an incredible relationship with that company. Tell us a little bit about that as we continue to explore the importance of industrial relationships.
Well, we have a wonderful relationship, and I would say a long relationship with Gentex, about 30 years. And so they are a major employer near the lakeshore for us. And so they are very much a partner for us in providing training to their employees. And so they have been committed to us as much as we've been committed to them. And we have a Lakeshore campus that opened in November of 21. And they were major contributors to many of the equipment that we use there. And so there's been this real symbiotic relationship where they help to support us from a technology standpoint, but also we help train many of their employees. And as they also start to develop facilities in Grand Rapids, we're asking how can we help? And it's also great places for our students to enter into the job market. And so we're continuing to find creative ways to deliver education to their employees that they need to meet their ever-changing environment. And so it's an ongoing, regular communication. In fact, Gentex was one of the first businesses that I called upon when I became the president because we have such a great relationship with them and value that one so much.
I think you make a really interesting point. We have a lot of observations when we talk about educators building great relationships with industry. One of the things that we say often that I actually stole from a friend of mine is that if you ask for money, you'll get advice. If you ask for advice, you'll get money. And so going to them and looking for ideas more so than just funding, really important. But you also highlighted the importance of reaching out to them and offering your assistance and really sharing with them that, look, before we ever get into how we expand our labs, how we expand our programs, we want to hear from you how we can help. What are some of the ways that you think a community college can offer assistance to an industrial employer?
Well, I think in what you just described is exactly it, but also, again, finding those creative and innovative ways to deliver what their needs are. And so I think part of that for us that we're very committed to listening and understanding before we offer solutions. And I think also for, in this case with Gentex, we serve as a gateway to some state funds. So in Michigan, we have something called the Michigan New Jobs Training Program, and we're the largest user of that grant program. It's a tax recapture program for businesses to hire new employees. And so in the last 10 years, GRCC has trained over 22,000 employees using that grant. And we currently have a grant with Gentex for about 300 jobs in their Zealand and Holland area, and that's for about $500,000. And so I think that's also a way to be creative and innovative and in that partnership. And how you can do that is, what opportunities do you have as a community college with grant dollars that also help benefit the business, but benefit the community too?
The stories I love to hear are the ones like this, where it's one thing to get funding, it's another thing to put it to work for the betterment of the community. And that sounds like that's exactly what you've done through the partnership with Gentex. I know that we've got presidents and other leaders of institutions of higher education, Chuck, across the country that are hearing this and saying, how do I go about building that kind of relationship? Is there advice that you would share with them in terms of building these rock solid industrial relationships?
Well, I think, number one, being engaged, being available. The businesses that we work with know that they can reach out to me directly. They all have my cell phone number 24/7, but it's beyond me. And so we have our workforce development team out there who interacts. We have our deans and our associate degree areas, our credit bearing courses out there interacting with business and industry, asking what are your needs, how can we assist. And so it's really a team effort that we put forth and do it in a very intentional way.
That intentionality is so important. And, your answer there reminds me of a question that I heard posed actually by a good friend of mine, the former CEO of Gateway Technical College in our region here in Wisconsin, Brian Albrecht. And Brian and I were at a conference last February. We were in San Diego, speaking to a group of industrial employers. There were probably 400 people in the audience. And Brian asked this question. He said, how many of you have your technical college's president's cell phone number loaded into your contacts? And it was like, honestly, maybe 1% of the audience raised their hand. And these were people from all over the country, not picking specifically on California. But that just always stuck with me. And to hear you say that these people have your cell number, that you want them to be able to reach out to you directly, not to work through a gatekeeper of some sort or have some Byzantine process to get in touch with you, but you want to hear from them directly. And that's what I'm hearing, correct? You want them to feel like they've got that lifeline to you.
Absolutely. And likewise, their CEOs have often provided me their cell phone numbers. And so it's a two-way communication, making it very easy for us to respond and to be in touch with each other.
And being in touch and getting this incredible feedback and input from your industrial employers. You already touched on your advisory boards. I think if I remember correctly, you said you had 17 advisory boards across the college. So message number one to our industrial employers is be involved and be in touch with the folks at your local community college. But be interested, Chuck, in your assessment of, all right, once that input comes to the college in the form of an advisory board meeting or input from an employer and so on, how does that work its way into curriculum, equipment, and the experience of the student?
Well, I think number one, we listen with a purpose, and we're not stepping into those meetings just as this, kind of perfunctory thing that we check off a list and say, yeah, we listen to our partners, but we really do make change and do listen. And so we've done that in a variety of areas, and also been able to develop things in the next step. So we started with Meyer and training some of their employees, and that led to feedback on some of our curriculum. And now they came back and said, we want to do more. We also use that same approach with our automation lab. And so we reached out to business leaders, and as we started to build our automation lab and write a grant for that, we asked them what the needs were and what did we need to change in our curriculum and what did they see in the future for this area. So we not only are training really for today, but training for the future as well. And so it's those partnerships, again, that help us do that, because they're just as familiar with what's next in their field and in their industry, in many cases more so than we are. And so we need to make sure that we're keeping up with the pace of their change in environment. And they're the ones who can, in many cases, best provide that guidance to us. And so we adjust where we can based upon their feedback. And they see it. And it's important that they see that it's actually happening.
The best way to continue to get that input and support is to take action on the suggestions that you're hearing. And if they are telling you there's certain technologies they want to see or certain competencies or learning outcomes that they want to have in their current and future employees, that they can see you adjusting curriculum and programming and student experience in a way that delivers on that, that just builds engagement. And it's going to create even more opportunities for you to strengthen that partnership and to continue to build toward what the community needs most. That's the community of your industrial employers, also the community of your students. And certainly the world of learning is changing. We have more diverse types of learners, or maybe we're just identifying the diversity in the types of learners, or a little bit of both. We want to make sure that all of our graduates have career relevant skills. So, in addition to listening to industrial employers and acting on their feedback, what other recommendations do you have to make sure that learning remains relevant for your students?
Well, I think, getting that continual feedback is part of that, and also from our students and also from our alumni. Did they feel well prepared to do the jobs that they're doing? And getting that feedback and having them involved in those conversations, which is part of what we also do, particularly in our technical areas. That's part of the process of adjusting and building that curriculum and helping them to have the relevant skills that they need for the jobs that they're seeking. But one of the things that we do here is that we make sure we have learning outcomes that are linked to our general education learning outcomes within our workforce training programs. And so we have always had the view of we're training students for the workforce, whether they are in short-term non-credit programs or if they're in associate degree programs with the intention to transfer. And so we've been very intentional in building pathways across all those areas. So we offer our workforce training programs in a variety of formats online. We have apprenticeship programs. We have the traditional in classroom. We also offer many of those courses in 7 weeks. So for students who want to kind of power through some of those. But once a student has earned a credential, then it can lead to a certificate, then it can lead to an associate's degree. That we've been very intentional in linking those learning outcomes and those competencies across the institution to make sure that we're providing those pathways to students, and so that it really focuses as almost like a career ladder of opportunities for students. And so I think that's something we do exceptionally well.
Absolutely. That career ladder is such a great analogy in providing these opportunities for students, regardless of where they are in their careers, or learners for that matter, regardless of where they are in their careers. So I love the way that you suggest that we want to meet learners where they are, that we want to give them options. We know they're going to be coming into and out of the workforce over the course of time, and we want to be there and meet them where they need us to be. Really, really important. And your focus on the credentialing side of things and on competency based learning and understanding what students know and what outcomes we want them to have as they're moving on through their educational pathway. Our listeners know I'm a huge advocate for third party credentials. We did have Susan Corbin, who leads LEO, the director of the Labor and Economic Opportunity Department in your state of Michigan, on the podcast. She talked all about 60 by 30, which is the statewide program to instill or impart third party credentials to 60% of your workforce by the year 2030. That's a really, really bold goal, but making huge progress. Tell us a little bit, Chuck, about how Grand Rapids Community College has participated in that effort to equip so many of your learners with these third party credentials.
And I know I've said probably a million times during this podcast partnerships, but it really is rooted in those partnerships. And I think one of the unique things that we have here in Michigan is that we don't have a coordinating body of higher education. Our community colleges and our four-year institutions are all autonomous, but yet we still need to work in partnership to do things. And so we have a partnership where we work with Delta College and Macomb College to help achieve some of those goals, and specifically jobs for the future through our work with them. And how do we provide that economic mobility and share those certificates and those programs? And we do that often through online programs and share faculty and share providing credentials. And so that is one way that we do that here in Michigan, is do partnerships with other community colleges, and also think beyond that in terms of partnerships where we build relationships and partnerships with four-year institutions and also graduate schools within those four-year institutions, to be very intentional in those pathways, because students are linking their work to their education. And if we can build those ladders, starting with a credential or certificate is part of that. And we're also working with our K-12 system to see how we can translate career tech education that's offered through the K-12 system to third-party credentials that we can count the students' work from their high school years towards those credentials. And so it's really twofold from that perspective. And students like to see what they're doing is relevant and that it matters and that it leads to something. And also employers really like that too. And so they like to be involved earlier with students rather than later and be part of that conversation. And so we've seen some of our employers be very intentional with trying to mentor some of those high school students who are on track to earn a certificate or a credential. And then how can we also crosswalk those things from the non-credit side to the credit side of the institution? Students don't want to lose those credentials. And so building those systems that make sure that what we're teaching is relevant and that it can carry on if the student so desires. But that also, I think, is very meaningful for employers as well.
I'm glad you mentioned the employers. You know, that one of the huge benefits of third party credentials, of course, is that we have a student that now has these competencies, these skills, and holding on to that credential and presenting that to an employer and say, here's what I know how to do, here's what I'm capable of doing in the workplace. And one of the things that I've been a huge advocate for is employers taking notice of the different credentials that exist in their employment space. So, great message to our industrial employers about the value of third party credentials. So, I'm really, really optimistic for the future of education. I'm also optimistic, as our audience knows, about the future of technology. And one of the trends on the technology side that you can't spend any time in Michigan without hearing about is the whole idea of EV and mobility. I mentioned having some time at the LG plant in Holland, which was fascinating, a huge battery plant, right in your backyard. That was at the same time, by the way, that I was over in Detroit at the Detroit Regional Chamber, and we were leading a technical work group among individuals who were devising competencies around EV and mobility for the Smart Automation Certification Alliance. When a lot of people think about EV, when they think about mobility, when they think about the changing face of the automobile industry, they think about Detroit. And there's a lot of really cool things going on in your part of the state over on the western end of Michigan with regard to EV and mobility as well. So take a little credit and tell our audience what's going on your end of the state of Michigan.
First of all, I'll say we have a saying here in Michigan: the West Coast is the best coast of Michigan. And so we do have incredible things that are happening here around EV. And so, as we talked about earlier, the collaboration, we're part of the Michigan EV Jobs Academy. And so that is a collaboration that is across many of the community colleges, and our Dean of Workforce Development and our faculty participate in those. In fact, I think this is where we were leading in the state, and the curriculum that is used within that Jobs Academy is curriculum that was developed here at GRCC. But we've also created those classes and on EV and also hybrid. That's part of our associate degree programs. It's very much part of what we're doing. And we also have a battery boot camp. And so that's something that is going to be going live. And we work, as you mentioned, LG, but we also have other businesses and industry that we work with related to EV. We're going to have 2 new automotive certificates that are going to go live again this year as well. We do a lot of that work here on the west side. While we have a very diverse economy here in West Michigan, it still is heavily reliant upon the automotive industry. And so we can't ignore that or leave that to others just to figure out, because there's so much connection here on the west side of the state.
Credit to you and to Grand Rapids Community College for taking the lead on this emerging technology and really preparing your students to work around it, and not just your students, but I'm sure members of the workforce as well that are continuing to evolve in this new world of technology. It's going to be really, really exciting future. It's been a phenomenal conversation today with Dr. Charles Lepper, the president of Grand Rapids Community College. We do have time for one last question, Chuck, that I'd love to pose to you, and it's one that we love to pose to all of our guests here on the Tech Ed podcast. I'm going to take you back to, a number of years ago to being about 15 years old, and would love to have you share with our audience. If you had one piece of advice to share with that young Chuck Lepper, what would that piece of advice be?
Take every opportunity as an opportunity. And so I've been fortunate, over my career that I have gone into spaces that I didn't think that I would be successful in. Starting at age 15, I worked in the offices of a manufacturing feeder bowl company that I typed quotes for them, but I learned a lot about manufacturing then from that process. But also my kind of career path started out in student affairs and taking opportunities to work in academic affairs, but also while working in my on my doctorate, just really asking myself, like, what is it that I'm not getting? And then create those opportunities for yourself, and including some practical experience and workforce development at Ivy Tech. And so I think just trying to always make sure you find opportunities and be creative with your plans, because I never set out to be a college president. I never set out really to be an educator. My undergraduate degree is in human resources and personnel management, but I really thought I would end up working in the international business sector. And so be flexible with your plans, take everything as an opportunity and learn from it, and recognize that your path is not as narrow or forward as you think it is.
Isn't that the truth? Take every opportunity as an opportunity. Certainly, you've done that throughout your career. I can tell you that if somebody had told me when I was 15 years old that I was going to be a podcast host at the age of 55, I first of all would have asked them what in the world that was, but certainly had no expectation that I would be sitting in this chair. To your point, sitting there in the chair as president of Grand Rapids Community College. And again, from experience, having spent time on your campus, I know what a great institution that is. I know how proud you are to be in the role and how fortunate the institution is to have you as its leader. Dr. Charles Lepper, president of Grand Rapids Community College. Chuck, really appreciated your time today. It was a lot of fun to get to know you. Well, I'm so glad I had that opportunity to spend some time with Dr. Charles Lepper, the president of Grand Rapids Community College, who really shared with us everything we expected. We talked all about the value of incredible partnerships between institutions of higher education, between them and their state funding sources, between them and their students and their industrial employers. And we also got a firsthand look into how we can make really, really efficient use of funding from our state and our federal funding sources and from nonprofit funding sources as well. I want to thank Dr. Charles Lepper for a really, really insightful episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. Thank our audience for joining us. Of course, as you know, we have the best show notes in the business. You can find those at techedpodcast.com/Lepper. That is techedpodcast.com/LEPPER. You will also find this episode all over social media. Perhaps that's how you found us today. Whether you did or not, you know that you can find us on social media. We are on LinkedIn. We are on Facebook. We are on Instagram. We are on TikTok. So reach out, connect to us. We would love to see you there, and we'd love to see you next week on the next episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. Until then, I'm your host, Matt Kirkner.